You can help support the channel by heading to our merchandise store and picking up some of our great aircraft designs created by our graphic designer. We'll have everything from fighters to transport aircraft, which you can choose to have printed on t-shirts, mugs, stickers and much more. Head to the description below and click the links and pick up your design today. Thank you and enjoy. Greg, when did you become interested in aviation?
Well, it was a long time ago, but it wasn't, for me personally, it wasn't a natural interest. I mean, I know lots of pilots and aviators become very interested in aviation from the early stage of their lives. That wasn't the case for me. It took me a long time to get going, actually. And the reason why I say that is because my path, my direction of travel, my sort of passion just wasn't there as a young kid. And I think the reason for that is I had quite a difficult time at school, and it wasn't easy for me. And the reason I say that is because I don't know if you've seen this quote from Einstein. He says that everyone's a genius, but if you test the fish in its ability to climb a tree, it's going to spend its whole life thinking it's stupid. And the same would be for me. If you asked me to read out a passage from my book or our book, then I'd just spend the whole afternoon thinking I'm stupid. And the reason for that is I can't really read. And so school was a real struggle for me because, like a lot of people, you have to stand up in front of people and you have to sort of, read out a passage. And I just couldn't do it. It was just a real struggle. And in fact, I get to certain points, I'd put my fingers on the sort of the words and I'd, get to a word and I'd get stuck. And the person next to me would sort of feed me the wrong word. And of course, the whole class would just laugh and erupt. Everyone was laughing. The teachers were laughing. Everyone was laughing, apart from me. And I was sort of paralysed in my sort of growth. And I felt stupid, humiliated, sort of embarrassed, belittled. So there was no real thought of aviation at that particular time for me. And so I had no idea what I wanted to do as a young person. But what did happen is I went through a load of jobs, like I'm sure lots of your viewers and listeners will do, is that I worked in hospitals, but eventually I ended up going to America and traveling with some of my friends. And it was in 1982. Now you'll remember what happened in 1982. It was the Falklands War. And I was just there watching, stuff happening, watching TV, and I saw helicopters hovering over burning ships and picking up people from water. And at that point, I thought, that seems like a really interesting job to do. So I had an idea that I would sort of join the Navy, but I wanted to join as an air crewman. I certainly didn't want to join as a pilot. I mean, there won't be many pilots around who can't read, but anyway, so I can add to that story whenever you want to. But yeah, I initially applied to join the Navy as an air crewman.
It's really interesting. So, obviously it was a Navy. Did you ever consider the RAF then, or was it Navy that was your focus at the time?
No, definitely not the RAF. Definitely. It'd be illogical, really. So my dad was in the Navy, so he spent all his life in the Navy. In fact, he joined when he was 15. He joined in the Second World War, and so it's sort of. I saw what sort of life he had, and I just thought it wasn't a crazy idea to go and join the Navy or try and join the Navy. But so no, I hadn't really thought about the RAF actually, because the passion for flying wasn't really there, because I just didn't know what I wanted to do. It wasn't until I saw something which I thought was worthwhile did I sort of consider that avenue. But but as you probably know, you can't. But at that time, you couldn't join as air crew. You couldn't join as air crewman. You'd have to join something else. And the guy in the careers office said to me, he said, "What about joining as a chef?" And I came back and I was very happy with the joke. And I said, "That's not my cup of tea, actually," and which I was happy with. But he said, "Well, why don't we look? If you're interested in aircraft, why don't you think about joining and become as a pilot or an observer, which is the Navy equivalent?" And I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to become a pilot. They don't take pilots who can't really read too well. So I put down in my application form to be an observer only. And I went and did all the tests, and which at those times were at Biggin Hill. And I managed to pass them, which is about the first thing I'd ever passed in my life, actually. In fact, because at school, this was my ASBO. I got unclassified in English O level or modern languages, grade 0. So that's not too sharp. So, but at that time, the person who was doing the tests, he just sort of called me up and said, I have to let you know you passed for both the tests, but if the Navy were to take you on, they wouldn't take you on as an observer, they'd only take you as a pilot, because my sort of aptitude tests were sort of stronger towards that area. So I changed my application form there and then to want to be a pilot. How lucky was that?
Yeah, it's brilliant, yeah. So obviously you got straight, or you wanted to go up to be a pilot at this point, I guess. Can you talk us through some of your basic and flying training before you went on to your frontline squadron?
Yeah, of course. The process to get in the Navy wasn't straightforward either. It was I applied, and you had to go through a thing called the Admiralty Interview Board, and I went for my first attempt, and they came back and said, "Look, with much regret, we have to say that you didn't make the required standard." So that was a bit of a knock. So I set about a program for about a year to sort of try and rectify some of the shortfalls, and they were concerned about my academic ability, which I think is quite reasonable. So I did night school, things like that. And the second time round, it was delighted to for them. When they said congratulations, you passed. And then of course you start the training, and for me the training started at Britannia Royal Naval College, which is in Dartmouth, a beautiful building. It was unusual actually because my younger brother was already there, so when I turned up he was already there, so he could sort of show me the ropes. And I had a little bit of sort of imposter syndrome set in there because I thought, I'm not great at school. I failed the Admiralty Interview Board, and I'm sort of here just by sort of a wing and a prayer. But what I did realise quite early on, that I was just normal. Everyone was the same, and we did have a couple of people who really, were really shining. I had a person who became the first Sea Lord, and another person who became an admiral and knighted and became a very senior position in NATO. But the rest of us were just normal Joes. We just got on. There were people who were very sporty. There were people who were academic. There were people who sort of, very strong at leadership. So the whole mix of people. So the Dartmouth experience was a great experience, but again, there's a lot of academic stuff you have to do, and again, I didn't do too well on that either. But when I started to, I don't know, when I started to feel comfortable, is when we actually started flying, and you started flying on the Chipmunk, which is my first aircraft, same as Mandy's actually. So she flew that, and that was a delightful aircraft to fly. And we did that at Plymouth, and then I really got excited about the whole thing. I thought I really loved the environment, and what I did find is my sort of stick and rudder skills, my hand-to-eye coordination was okay, and a lot of people sort of struggled with that. I didn't say I find it easy. Definitely didn't find it easy, but it was sort of natural. It was more natural than anything else I did. So that was really good, and progressed through the various training things which you might probably be familiar with. Went to combined train with the RF, so we did sort of training on a Bulldog. And at that point, I got selected to be a helicopter guy, which I was delighted to do. And so came down to a place called Cold Rose, which is in Cornwall, and started flying the helicopter stuff, flying Gazelles. And then I went on to fly the Sea King Mk4, which was my sort of first frontline squadron. So that was based at Cold Rose as well. So the mighty Sea King was my first operational aircraft.
So let's get on to the Sea King. So what were your first thoughts of the helicopter?
Well, it's great. I mean, I still find it extraordinarily unusual that you can sort of sit in a machine, and you can sort of pull the collectors above, and you can hover at sort of 10 to 15 feet. It seems extraordinary that the technology behind that. So I think everyone gets a thrill with that. It's quite unstable, actually. The Gazelle, I think in particular, was quite unstable to fly. But the Sea King, because its size, it was a much bigger aircraft, and had a significant downwash. Actually, if you sort of underneath the rotors, you had about 40 knot downwash. So it's quite a powerful aircraft. And the version I got went to the frontline aircraft I went to was ASW, anti-submarine warfare. So that was the area of operation which we got involved in. Now you have to sort of rewind the clock a little bit. This was over 40 years ago, so the sort of Cold War era was really around, and that was a big threat. And so they had a lot of the Navy ships were associated with anti-submarine, and yeah, it was an extraordinary aircraft to fly. I mean, you didn't fly on your own, of course. Normally had two pilots. You had an air crewman who was also the sonar operator, because that's how we sort of did our work effectively, was with sort of sonars, active and passive, and then you had an observer as well, who's a real tactician in the back, who would sort of fight the battle. Yeah, I was delighted to go frontline. I have to say, not many of us did. Well, I said not many, probably about half of us actually ended up going frontline. So on a course of about 20, 10 people fall by the wayside. So it's quite brutal, really.
Yeah, so talking about, I guess, some of your ground and flying training on the Sea King, did it feel like a massive leap forward coming from the aircraft you've been training on beforehand?
What, to the Sea King?
Yeah.
Yeah, not from the Gazelle. The Gazelle was a single engine, and it's quite twitchy, quite agile. So I found the Gazelle much more difficult to fly. The Sea King I found, again, not easy. I wouldn't not say, but I found it more straightforward actually. The stabilization system, which means in the hover, it sort of took out some of the sort of the pressures to actually fly it. When that failed, actually, it became much more short and jittery in the hover. But no, I think the training really sets you up, and it's just stepping stones in like a lot of aviation and other walks of life. It's just building blocks to get you to where you need to be, and that seemed very straightforward to me. I never felt there was a huge, massive jump which was insurmountable. And after a couple of years, you just find yourself on the frontline squadron. But the frontline squadron is very different to the training. But yeah, the training is well set up and well established, very mature. Of course, wasn't the first person to go through and fly the Sea King.
So I have to ask, let's talk about ship landings. Did you practice this during your initial flying training, or was it straight away, or was it at the end of the syllabus? How does that work, Craig?
Yeah, it's towards the end. So it's, if I remember, the squadron is called 810 Squadron those days. I'm not sure if it still exists. I don't think it does actually. So at the end of your training on the operational flying training unit, you sort of get attached to a ship. So in my time, it's called a ship called Engadine, doesn't exist, and then it went to RF. Argus and other ships. In fact, I saw today actually that Argus is just about to be retired, so that's 40 years old. When I was there, it was a brand new ship, so that tells you how old I am. But yeah, so you go and do that, and that's quite a moment, obviously, because that's your bread and butter stuff. Being in the Navy is working with ships and landing on ships, and yeah, it's quite a challenge to do that, particularly at night. Actually, particularly at night when you haven't got so many visual references. And particularly if the ship is operating in a high sea state, so if it's moving around and pitching and rolling, that becomes quite a challenge to do that. But absolutely, it's all part of your training before we go frontline. I don't think there's much call for a frontline helicopter pilot in the Navy. You can't land on a ship, so you have to sort of make the grade in that respect. But yes.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds terrifying. I mean, I've sat in a Sea King, and it just seems crazy sitting in the cockpit, just doing that over a ship. It just seems crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's something to get used to. I think, I mean, it's just the environment which you get used to. I say building blocks to get you're not going to go on that first day, but I think the secret to do that in terms of flying helicopters is not to focus on the deck or the ship, because that's moving around. You need your horizons and your visual horizons, so you try not to do that, and you pick your moment to come over the deck. You've probably seen pictures of the ships, rocking and rolling, moving all over the place. You definitely have to sort of come across the deck and land at an appropriate moment. So you see lots of helicopters hovering to the side, waiting for their moment. That's what they're doing, because, yeah.
And let's talk about the Sea King layout. What was the cockpit like? Was there a standard crew, or was it different every time, depending on the mission you flew?
Yeah, so I started off on the ASW version, so that's the Sea King Mk4, and as I say, that crew would be two pilots, and they would normally be crewed up. So if you were a new person in the front line, you'd be crewed up with a more experienced captain of the aircraft, if you like, and then you'd have an observer down the back who'd operate the radar, and then the air crewman who'd operate the sonar, either the active sonar, I think it was called the which came out the bottom of the helicopter, the 915, if I remember correctly, and or the passive ones, which they would chuck out and to sort of lay a barrier to allow us to sort of hunt down the submarines. So that would be a standard fit for a Sea King Mk5. But I did fly the Sea King Mk4, which is the sort of the jungly version. And so after a couple of tours, the Mk5, I went and flew the Mk4, which is based at a place called Royal Naval Air Station Portland, which is near Weymouth. It doesn't exist anymore; it's closed down. But that was a very different aircraft. I mean, it's the same aircraft in terms of Sea King, but it was flown very differently. And again, normally you would just fly that single pilot, and the role I flew it in was either search and rescue or maritime counter-terrorism (MCT). And so you'd normally fly a single pilot. Well, you could fly two pilots, but you're quite happy to fly a single pilot, an air crewman and a diver. So that would be the complement, particularly for search and rescue, on that aircraft. Yeah.
So let's just talk about the Sea King as a whole. Obviously, you flew two marks there, but what would you say the strengths and weaknesses of the helicopter were?
I think the strengths were it's a powerhouse. I mean, you had a lot of power to do it. the Sea King Mk4 could carry a lot of equipment. You carry sort of depth charges, and you could fight the role. The Sea King Mk4, as an example, had plenty of excess power, so you could carry lots of troops, and that's what designed to do, carry soldiers and Marines. And again, that was quite an agile aircraft to fly as well. So I think that would be its strength. It was very reliable as well, actually, and it was a nice aircraft to fly from a pilot perspective. I mean, really nice. It's a delight to fly, actually. I suppose the weakness, what would be the weakness be? I mean, it's difficult to say what the weakness is. So I think for the Mk4, the weakness would be its position of the radar. So you always have a blind spot. So the observer would always ask you to turn heading so they could see ahead. So that's changed actually in the new helicopters, the Merlin. That's changed. They've rectified that problem, but that was a bit of a problem, the blind spot. So I'd say that would be a weakness. They probably flew too long, actually. That might be a weakness in terms of crew fatigue. Yeah, you could be on task. You just do ripple flying, so you'd sort of fly for about 4 hours in the hover. You did a lot of time in the hover. I mean, the capabilities, and it was extraordinary. It could auto, what do they call it? I can't remember exact words now, but it would bring the aircraft to the hover automatically, auto transition. So you'd push a couple of buttons, and it would bring from like 200 feet down to a 40 feet hover. So that was quite a phenomenal capability, actually. So it would hover every day. But at night, sitting there at night, thinking, the automatics are sort of doing this for us, was concentrating the mind a bit. So yeah, it's a very capable aircraft, actually, both variants.
So obviously, let's talk about your first squadron doing the anti-sub stuff. What kind of flying would you be doing on a daily basis? Would it be like a general routine, or would it be different every day?
It depends where you are. I think if you're back at base, so the squadron I was the first squadron was 826 Squadron, and then I went on to 814 Squadron. 826 was basically complementing RFAs, the Royal Fleet Auxiliaries. So we've gone back at those ships. 814 would be one of the carriers, so HMS Invincible is the ship, effectively, which we were doing that. So depending where you were. So if you're back at base, you do a lot of sort of training, so staff continuation training, so to practice your instrument flying or general handling flying. But if you're operational on the ship, then it would just be operational flying. So that would be the main thing. A lot of it would be exercises, but these exercises would be with different units, maybe the RAF or other NATO organisations, either from Europe or from America, and that would be long-term exercises. And so you go anywhere which is required. Either go north, so we go to north quite a lot. Spent a lot of time caught up in the Barents Sea, so that was interesting, exercising our rights in terms of being able to operate in international waters. Or you go to Europe, quite a lot of stuff with Europe, or America. Went across to America, across the pond a couple of times, and that would take you things like to the ranges, to the Andros Islands and the Ortec ranges. So you drop live weapons and with submarines around. I say live weapons without a warhead. Let's be absolutely clear about that. We don't want to sort of shoot our own submarines down, but they would be live in all other aspects apart from the warhead. So yeah, it was a fascinating, wide-ranging operating the Sea King. Yeah, definitely. I really enjoyed it, actually. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and did you ever fly the Sea King on live ops?
Not really live ops in terms of war, but in terms of live ops in terms of operating live weapons, and also to but not the Sea King. When I did become a fixed-wing pilot after that, and so when I was flying fixed-wing aircraft, I used to take people around. So there's some areas like Bosnia, for example, took troops and passengers down there, and also to Northern Ireland. But in terms of the main wars, no, I wasn't involved at that stage. So it's a shame, really.
Oh, yeah, did you want to go?
Well, I think you don't join the services without sort of understanding that there's going to be a requirement for you to sort of go to that particular theatre. So, yeah, I mean, if I had to go, I would have gone, of course, and would have, in a way, would have really liked to experience that. But it just wasn't the right time, really, or I wasn't in the right job at the right time. Maybe that was a better way of putting it. But as I say, I went to Northern Ireland quite a few times, and but as to wars, no, I didn't do that.
So, can you share maybe a few memorable stories that stick out in your mind from flying the Sea King that might be interesting to our viewers?
Yeah, of course. what would they be? Well, probably let's do a couple then. So I talked about being Sea King Mk4 pilot. So that was, as I say, based on the south coast. And search and rescue is a really unbelievably rewarding job. And as I said, you fly with a single pilot, and you flew with an aircrew and then a diver. And you just sort of sit around. It was just, a lot of times sort of sitting around reading the newspapers. But the aircraft, the helicopter, would be prepared and ready to go. So you would try and get airborne within about 3 minutes. So if the call came, it would be a big klaxon, noise throughout the squadron buildings, and the pilot would run out and try and get the helicopter sort of start up as quick as they could. At that point, the engineers would also come out, so the ground crew would come out to allow you to start it and to engage the rotors. And at some point, normally when both engines are running, the rotors started, the aircrewman would come out, and all they would just say is that, head east or head north or south or whatever it be. So you get the aircraft airborne, and you do your after takeoff checks, and then you sort of head out to the direction. And only at that point would you sort of find out what the job was. The one which is quite memorable was it got called to Lulworth Cove, and it's on the south coast. And if you don't know, the helicopter probably wants to hover into wind, and the reason for that is you get a better performance, so less power required. And because of the wind direction, it was quite difficult to get the aircraft in position so you could be facing the cliff. And so you effectively had to back it up. And this really typifies how we'd operate. So I'd get the aircraft or helicopter stable in a position, and the aircrew would come to me, say, come right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, stable. Come back to, etc. And we do the same thing. So as a helicopter pilot, you need static visual references to hover. So you want to pick a tree or something which wasn't going to move. And on this particular job, we knew that what happened is a young child had sort of fallen down the cliff, fallen about 40 feet down the cliff.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a wow moment. It's not anyone falling anything really down the cliff is doesn't bode well, does it? So anyway, but on the top of the cliff, there's this woman, and she was distraught. And I kept on focusing on this woman, and I just came to the conclusion it must have been this person's mum, this young boy's mum. And I just said to myself, stop focusing on the mum, stop focusing, concentrate on what you're doing, just get your normal visual references. And in those days, we didn't have any sort of comms between, once the diver had gone out on the winch, you didn't have any comms, or hand signals. So the crewman in the back, not the diver, the diver would go down, the crewman in the back would sort of give me a commentary. So, Whiskey, as an example, was on the cliff. He's with the casualty. He's got the casualty. He's been winched up now and then brought into the aircraft. And what would normally happen is that the air crewman, who was sort of first aid trained and very highly trained, I have to say, and extraordinarily talented people, would then make an assessment saying, look, this person needs to go to hospital immediately, or whatever it is. We would normally take them to hospital. But because the emotional thing attached to it, we thought, the greatest thing we can do now is really unite this young man who actually was completely untouched from his drama falling 40 feet. So we landed on the cliff, and Whiskey took this young guy out and sort of reunited, and that was a real moment, actually. So a real moment. This is just one job which we did. So they're all different, and but it just, I don't know, for some reason it just stuck with me, especially being a parent now. Sort of can imagine what it'd like to sort of have one of your child's one day not knowing, not knowing the outcome, effectively, how badly injured they were, or even if worse, if they didn't survive. So that was a story stuck out. The other one, I think, is that same unit, actually. It's based at Portland, which is a squadron called 772 Squadron. Again, doesn't exist anymore. And we had this role called Maritime Counter-Terrorism, MCT, and that was extraordinarily rewarding in terms of a helicopter pilot. So if if something happened to, like, a ship or a UK registered ship or a what are they called, oil rigs or something like that, or gas rig, to be compromised, then there was a unit around which you sort of go and help out, and we would fly in fairly low, as fast as we could, and we'd sort of drop soldiers and special people to go and sort of sort this situation out. And so that was a very rewarding job, actually, doing that. So we'd do that for ships at night or oil rigs at night. So that was probably the pinnacle of my helicopter flying. Quite exhilarating, actually, really exhilarating. And it's a time when sort of NVGs were sort of coming in, so we'd start off flying with those sort of night vision goggles. They were very early stages. I think they're much better now. It's like looking through two sort of telescopes with toilet rolls.
I've heard that before, yeah.
Probably Mandy said that, actually. She probably said that. I think she described that as, I think when she did
sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah.
Great stuff. But it sounds like you had a great time on the Sea King. But how would you sum up the aircraft, and how many hours did you get on it?
I probably did about half my time in the Navy. I did flying the helicopters, which mainly would be Sea Kings, and probably got about 2,000 hours on the Sea King. But I like moving forward. I like moving forward in my in life, in terms of my career and that sort of thing. And I always wanted to do other things, so there's a desire to do other things in the Navy.